series. I'm so delighted to be the co-MC of this for the fall, and we have two wonderful speakers presenting on their dissertation work for prospective faculty candidates. And I don't know if anyone is watching online, but we will try to have stick pretty close to time to have 20 minutes of presentation for each presenter. I'll flash some signals of like 5, 2, 0, and I'll make really strong and awkward eye contact at you to wrap up, and then have a couple of minutes of Q&A. And then we'll have a longer, broader Q&A across. One of the things that we've been talking about, and I heard some feedback from last time too, is wanting to see a little bit more of the process, especially since this is a new series or a new dimension to the R3 series, around like, how are we thinking about this in terms of for the students of putting together presentations about your work, and also for the faculty of when we see candidates and when we've been candidates, what are the kinds of questions that come up? And so hopefully this will be a constructive conversation all the way around, even if you're not presenting. So with that, I'll stop, and I think Teng Zhao is first presenting on his dissertation work.
It's at the bottom.
Should we just pray? There are two down there.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this R3, and my name is Teng Zhao. First, I would like to thank the department for giving me such a wonderful opportunity to have a job talk practice. The presentation includes 3 parts. First, who am I? And second, what I'm doing right now, and the third one is what I'm going to do in the future. So this is me, 29 years old, from China, for a master's degree in public administration at FSU. And my hobby includes reading and play basketball. And I started my post-secondary education in 2008 at Shanghai Maritime University. And my undergraduate major is public administration. Then in 2014, I came to Florida State and to pursue master's degree of public administration. Right now, I'm pursuing the Ph.D. degree of higher education. In this April, I got the certificate of full program evaluation. So about my skills, I can use statistical software such as data, SPSS, and M+. I can do program evaluation and using summative and formative method. For the method training, I can use the quasi-experimental design, structured equation modeling, and logistical regression. I can speak both Chinese and English. So my dissertation is built up by 3 separate but related papers. I'm finished 2 of them. I'm still working on 1. So today I will focus on the 2 finished ones. So a broad background of my dissertation: there are increasing demand of labor demands in STEM field. There are 8.6 million STEM occupations, representing 6.2% of U.S. employment in 2015. However, there's a huge wage gap between STEM versus non-STEM jobs. The gap is nearly twice difference. And there are demography issues such as there are more men than women in STEM field, and there are more white and Asian than black and Hispanic in STEM fields. So the left figure shows the wage gaps. The top line is the wage of STEM occupations, and the bottom line are non-STEM jobs. And the right figure shows the gender difference in intending science and in engineering majors. We can see the clear difference. So thinking this is a STEM pipeline, and it is not. And so the current STEM literature focusing on the choice, the persistence, and the retentions, and the completions. So my dissertation really focusing on the entrance, which is the STEM major choice. So I seek to understand what factors may influence students' STEM major choice from individual, policy, and environment as three aspects. So my main research question is what are the relationship between math and science perceived abilities and the interests and students' STEM major choice. This is for individual aspect. And what are the merit aid policy would influence students' STEM major choice? This is the policy aspect. And high school contact will influence students' STEM major choice. This is content environment aspect. And the data set I'm going to use is from National Center for Educational Statistics. They are restricted used data set. The first one is high school longitudinal study of 2009. It falls from 9th grade to their college graduations. So this data set collects information about students' math and science information, their high school information, and also their college majors. And the second data I'm going to use is the beginning post-secondary students, and this data set collects information about students' merit aid information and college major information. So this I use HSLS in my first and third paper, and the BPS in my second paper. So the statistical approach I'm using is the logistical regression to address the first research question, broad research question, and composite score matching for the second one, and the structure equation modeling for the third one. So now let's talk about my first paper, the perceived abilities and interest on students' major choice. So the theory I'm going to use is the blended self-efficacy theory, which emphasizes individuals' beliefs on their capacities to achieve a certain goals. And also the second theory I'm using is the Healy and Rinder's interest development model, indicates how a person's interests influence their goals and levels of learning. And also previous literature focusing also found that gender, race, education, and occupations would also influence students' major choice. So there are three research questions in this paper. The first one was the relationship between perceived abilities and interests and their major choice. So the dependent variables I use logistic regressions. The dependent variable are STEM major choice, which is 1 and 0, and the perceived math ability and the perceived science ability are the main independent variables. And then I can show the demographic characteristics as gender and race, and also high school characteristics, the school urbanicities, those things, and also classroom characteristics. And similar when I explore the relation between the math interests and the students' STEM major choice, I just choose the main independent variable to math and science interests. The second research question is to what extent do perceived abilities or interests predict the students' STEM major choice. So I put those two main independent variables, which is perceived abilities and interests, into one equation model, one equations, and then I and test its multi-coordinate issue and check their standardized coefficient to explore which one could be more predictive. And the third research question is that those relationships vary gender and race. So I add interaction terms into the regression model, and those interaction terms include those interaction terms are between math and science interests, perceived abilities, and gender and race. So I use before running the regression, I use converge alpha to test the reliability of the survey items to measure this mean independent variables, which is say the mathematical abilities and interest. The reliability alpha seems good, so this enabled me to generate their means and then put them into the regression model. So the results showed that students with high perceived abilities, they are more likely to choose STEM majors, and the students with high math and science interests, they are more likely to choose STEM majors. Also, additionally we find that males are twice more likely than females to choose STEM majors. And after checking the standardized coefficient and test the multi-coordinate issue, we found that the perceived math and science abilities is more predictive than interest to predict a student's STEM major choice. And for the simplicity, I only showed the significant interaction terms here. So from this result, we can see that the relationship, only the relationship between math interest and students' major choice are varied by Asian group and white group. So the second paper, actually this is the third paper in my dissertation, and it's about high school content on students' STEM major choice. And the theory I'm using is the social cognitive career theory, emphasizes environment factors may influence students' career development, also influence their interests. And the other theory I'm using is how circle of socialization indicates schools are very crucial actors in students' socializations. So the framework of my paper is those high school environment may directly influence college students' STEM major choice, or they can indirectly influence students' college major choice through their by shaping or fostering their math and science interests. So there are also three research questions in my paper. And the first one is what's the relationship between high school environments and students' STEM major choice? And the second one, what's the relationship between students' math and science interests and students' STEM major choice? And does students' math and science interests mediate the effect from high school environment to STEM major choice? So the outcome variable is STEM major choice. The mediating variable is science and math interests, and the exogenous variable are AP math course, AP science course, STEM activities, and learning equipment. So first, the correlation matrix will be provided to say if there is a correlation between each items. And then the measurement model will be used to say whether the survey items could could better measure the latent factors. And then the structural model will be used to examine the hypothesis relationship between each variables, and the immediate effect will be tested using Sobel's test. So from the correlation matrix, we can say these three items are these three items and these three items, they are highly correlated together. So this provides initial evidence for me to put these three items, these 6 items to my measurement model. So 2 measurement model and the 3 structural model was tested. I used M+ to conduct the SEM model. M+ will provide the modification indices so that based on the modification indices, I can adjust my measurement model and the structural model. After I satisfy with the model, then I report the results. So this is my final measurement model. So we can see the standardized loading are very high. For example, for this one, the corresponding area is 0.74, which means 74% variance of this item, which is student, which the students think math is boring, was explained by student math interests. And this is my final structural model. I marked the significant results in red, and for this model, we can say AP science course could significantly predict students' science interest and significant predict students' STEM major choice. Math interest could significantly predict students' STEM major choice. Also, AP science course could directly significantly predict students' STEM major choice. Then we tested the mediated effect. Use this part, and using Sobel's test. Sobel's test gave us the results z equal to 3.9 and the p-value less than 0.05, which means the science interest could partially mediate the effect from AP science course to STEM major choice. My future research plan includes this is the last one. My future research plan includes STEM education, but I will mainly focus on East Asia, and also continue to explore what factors will influence students' STEM major choice. Also focusing on STEM persistence, retention, and degree completion. Since I'm from I'm also have interested in policy, so I also want to focus on policy diffusion and innovation. I'm particularly interested in one of the policy diffusion mechanism, which is from the policy diffusion from developed country to developed country. So I think, thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice job staying on time too. Any immediate questions on things? Like last week, we had like a very technical stats-heavy presentation to kick us off, and then the second one may not be in that same kind of methodological vein. And so you'll see juxtapositions, even if they're not necessarily always connecting. But we'll try to put that back together on the back end. Any questions for Teng?
On your first paper model, on the regression model, I couldn't tell from back here, but did you separate all like gender and race, or did you like do like Black women, Black men? Did you do like a combined variable from the data set?
I do have them to check the gender and the race issues using effect size. That's one of this part in my paper, but I didn't show it here. I created subgroups like white female, white male, black female, black male, and to explore whether there are gender issues or racial issues in STEM fields. But I didn't show it here.
Thank you.
Teng, I think you have the statistical aspect down. So thank you for that. I guess my question was more about like the actual implications of the data, and thinking about, to me, it's like your zip code is going to determine whether you're interested in becoming a STEM major or not, right? Like if the high school or the curriculum. So I'm interested in what particular implications, like could we take this to a district or to someone when we take this data and say these are your students are then going into higher education and these are the students that are becoming STEM majors and these are not. Do we have implications for them that we can offer from the data?
Yes, I think this is a very good question. So this is a national represented data. It's at the national level, and so for this paper, I only find the AP Science course could be more predictive. Could be predictive for students' STEM major choice. So in the implication parts, I suggest that because the majority of literature, past literature, they focusing on math and they like put some math like priority position in science. So these findings let me think also suggest the school administration whether we could more focusing on start to focusing on science education. So this kind of, but it's do has it, yeah, it's a really good question too, like how the national data set could be make implication to like local districts. I will think about it, but I haven't think about so far, but I will take it into consideration. Thanks.
Thank you.
There's a nice example of cleansing in job talk or any other talk too. But like, I hear your question and I appreciate your question, but you don't necessarily have to have an answer yet, especially when you're still dissertating. Any other last questions for me? Thank you. We'll switch and then we'll come back. And I'm taking notes. I'll take notes too, and I'll share with you, Kathy. So thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Erica Wiborg, and I'm a Ph.D. candidate in the higher education program. First, I want to say thank you for having me today. Today, I'll be speaking about disrupting the dominant discourse and leadership learning within the context of post-secondary education. More specifically in this talk, I'll be exploring whiteness from the perspective of critical race theories and theorists, and we'll be relating it to undergraduate leadership learning classrooms. I will show that we need to document discourses that feels white in order to ensure our education is liberatory rather than oppressive. And I also have an identity of being a critical qualitative scholar, so our data certainly will be a little bit different. I also am a former student affairs administrator, and I believe graduate and undergraduate leadership education and learning is a space I hope to create change within. So more specifically, to situate my identity as a scholar, I won't go in too depth because you have my materials in front of you, but it's important to know that I'm informed by Florida State University as an undergraduate student. I graduated in the Leadership Studies Certificate program, one of the first iterations of the cohorts that could graduate from the Leadership Studies program. That influenced my interest in thinking about leadership education and that being critical to the undergraduate experience. I then moved on to Texas A&M University, where I received my master's degree in student affairs administration. I worked in orientation, but I went back to the leadership space as being so crucial to the development of students during their college time. So as I was job searching, I got a full-time position at the Center for Leadership and Social Change at Florida State University at a time when the department was merging with the Center for Civic Education and the Center for Multicultural Affairs. And so my work started to merge social justice, identity, diversity, and leadership. And I coordinated leadership programming in the co-curricular settings for undergraduate students. So now I'm a doctoral student, a doctoral candidate, where I've been a teaching assistant and a research assistant in the Leadership Learning Research Center. And what that really means to me is that I believe teaching and research matters to who we are as leadership educators in higher education. So let's go ahead and talk about some terminology before I get into the purpose of my study and the statement of the problem. So there's three terms, well actually four terms that we're going to talk about: whiteness, leadership learning, and discourse. So for the purposes of my study, I define whiteness as embodied racial dominance through interpersonal and institutional processes, practices, and discourses that perpetuate global white supremacy in everyday lived experiences. So white supremacy is a big word in that definition, so it's important to also define what white supremacy is. White supremacy is actually an all-encompassing term of white dominance, including the political, economic, and social order based on historical and current accumulation of structural power that privileges white people as a group and oppresses other racial groups. Leadership learning is the context within which the unit of analysis, which I'm studying, and leadership learning can be defined as changes in knowledge, skills, behaviors, attitudes, values associated with the activity of leadership, which happens in curricular and co-curricular settings. But the purposes for my study, I'm focusing on curricular, so the leadership learning classroom. And then discourse is language. It's what we do on an everyday basis. It's written and spoken, but it is also an action. It's a behavioral interaction that occurs between people, and it is shaped, but also shapes society. So that is what discourse is. So the literature review that I've done for this study is situated around these four areas. And within the boxes, you'll see as we go through the literature review and the situation of the literature, there's also statements that I've pulled out from the literature as I've kind of coalesced my understanding of what these assertions might mean from my review. So first, let's start on the left side, which says leadership field. So the leadership field is built on consulting, coaching, and a small number of scholars that are considered experts in the field, which exerts a very narrow lens, which does mean that leadership as a field is intimately intertwined with patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy. And so if the field is connected to that, if we go to thinking more I guess, deeply, looking at the leadership content also perpetuates a white prototype in the research. And that's because it's often created and often maintained by white male leadership scholars. If you then look at like, okay, so we have the field, we have the content, but what about the practice of teaching? What does that look like in terms of pedagogy? And leadership pedagogy is pretty much the research on leadership pedagogy ignores racism as a reality by omitting social location, race, or considerations to disrupt the status quo. So that's ignored. We go to who the people could actually create change within, our leadership educators. What does the research say about that? Well, it says that leadership educators ignore the pervasive whiteness in leadership education, and by ignoring the pervasive whiteness in leadership educators are actually reinforcing systems of oppression and stifling agency in their students in the classroom. And educators are the folks that can create change, and within the system of academia are the folks that can create change and have agency to transform the classroom space. So based on this literature review, this is the statement of the problem. Without a critical analysis of whiteness and leadership education, the field will continue to perpetuate the real effects of racism through oppressing communities of color and unjustly privileging whites. And the purpose of this research is to understand the ways whiteness dominates the discourse in leadership learning, and a reflective tool will be developed to more readily understand whiteness within this context. So I've created a conceptual framework that merges a lot of various elements that matter to leadership learning into the classroom. And so starting on the far left side, for folks, sorry if you can't see that in the back, but it says critical race theory. And critical race theory, these three elements all influence the leadership learning discourse. And so CRT actually represents the theoretical orientation in the model. So the idea that there's the ordinariness of racism, even if it's hidden in the curriculum. and it focuses on challenging dominant ideologies. And so the focus of the theoretical orientation of CRT for my study is specifically to understand the ways in which racism operates in the context of leadership learning discourse. If we jump to the right, which is the practical application of CRT, critical leadership pedagogy is both the theory and practice of teaching and hopes to liberate the learner from the oppressive systems that exist within the education space. And so what critical leadership pedagogy represents is this participatory process that we engage in as educators and learners within the classroom space to really co-create knowledge. But here's the thing is if we are co-creating that knowledge and we have students and leadership educators that are coming into the space, so our leadership learners, both students and instructors, they bring their complete selves into the classroom, and those complete selves are influenced by white supremacy, which represents where whiteness comes into play within my conceptual framework. Whiteness is normalized through racist processes and practices in the classroom, but it can be resisted. And so that's something that I'm really focusing on in my study, is that we can do pedagogical actions in ways that can resist whiteness in the classroom. My specific unit of analysis is leadership learning discourse. I've already talked about it being the curricular leadership learning space. And what I'm studying is the ways in which our discourse can disrupt or perpetuate whiteness. And at the end of the study, this leadership learning reflection tool will hopefully raise new questions for leadership educators to use in the classroom, and then also hopefully later, once I do future research in the co-curricular setting as well. And so the hope would be that my plan is that this reflection tool will feature liberatory ways and more oppressive ways, and how we can kind of on a spectrum engage in pedagogical actions that lead more to liberatory leadership education. So the research questions for my study is in what ways does whiteness dominate discourse and leadership learning? And how is race discussed by the leadership educators and students through content and practice? To answer these research questions, I selected a qualitative critical discourse analysis design. CDA, critical discourse analysis, has roots in critical theory and critical theory, aligning with the questions in this study. It's also robust and flexible, which I contend is needed when studying societal issues, specifically systems of oppression within a classroom environment. And so CDA represents understanding the nuances of text and the more embedded meanings that come as a result of that. It sits at the intersection of language and society, and it will provide the how and why a particular discourse is dominated in the leadership learning classroom. So that is the research design. And the setting is, I didn't say this at the beginning, but I'm currently about to leave soon to collect my data. And so the setting and sample that's been confirmed is a large public research institution in the Midwest. The program has been around since the 1990s, so it's been a long-standing program at their institution. It's an academic curricular leadership minor for undergraduate students. It offers 15 credit hours where they require 4 core courses and 1 elective course for undergraduate students. And so currently, I engaged in purposeful sampling, and I have 6 to 7 leadership educators confirmed to participate in the study. They represent educators across multiple sections of core leadership courses. That was the criteria of inclusion, is that they teach a core leadership course, not that elective course, but a core leadership course, and that they also have to be teaching face-to-face sections. And the reason I decided to do face-to-face section is because of what we talked about at the beginning, that discourse is very much interactional. And so I thought, as the person engaging in the study, it was important for me to observe body language, to look at space and understand how energy can be racialized as well. All right, here's my data. The circles are represented by kind of the amount of importance or the amount of data I'll be collecting in my study. So as you can see here on the bottom left, classroom observations represent the majority of my data. And so what I'll be doing is I'll be video and audio recording 2 classroom sessions per educator. So what will be like class sessions are usually 50 to 75 minutes. So in total, the recorded minutes and both of audio and video that I'll have will be about 900 total minutes recorded of discourse. The discourse that will be recorded is not just discourse that the instructor is engaging in, but also that the students are engaging in. So if there are individual conversations happening, there'll be audio markers throughout the room that will capture the student dialogue as well in the classroom. The field notes that are designed for the classroom observations will be the typical descriptive notes. So how is the classroom set up? But it's also going to include research on critical leadership pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching practices that are influenced through K through 12 education. And that observation protocol will be sent to, so I'm white, I'm a white woman, and so it's important to send my protocol to a diverse range of leadership educators that have a commitment to social justice outcomes, who have different social locations, racial social locations than I do. So I have a close group of friends and peers that have agreed to review my observation protocol, and they'll be getting it today. So just really exciting. So moving forward with that. The detailed analysis won't happen while observations will happen. The detailed analysis will happen later in the data analysis process because aligned with critical discourse analysis studying. But I will be collecting supporting documents to understand the context and the situation of the, I'm not an instructor at this site, so I need to understand more details about the ways in which the classrooms are situated in the curriculum. And so I'll be collecting a syllabi, course calendar, also information about the outcomes of the program of the minor. And then after I have analyzed the data, I'll be scheduling a feedback circle with the leadership educators to share the findings of the study and also provide a reflective tool that they can look at to actually document discourses and whiteness. So to actually feedback on the reflection tool that I create as a result of the findings in this study. All right, so my analysis are represented in 3 phases, and this is really small fonts. I know that I probably can't see this, but the first phase of analysis, my analysis is influenced by Fairclough, his discourse analysis design. And so the first focus is the ways of representing the discourse and the ways whiteness dominates the discourse. And so the coding and in vivo will be descriptive codes as well as in vivo codes and patterns. The second analysis will be more on the ways of interacting. This is when the field notes and observations will come in, not just discourse, but the actual interactional themes that come up through the video analysis. And then the final phase will be studying the ways that leadership learning classrooms are discursive events. So we will actually compare across all of the observations to start bringing the discourse themes and the ways in which the leadership learning classroom is a discursive event. And the reflection tool will be analyzed in that last phase of the analysis, and it will focus on the ways in which on reporting out the discourse, but also support the development of a tool for reflection and action. This also is I'll get feedback from the leadership educators, so it's also a way for them to member check to say the ways in which this tool could be helpful for them, or questions that they present as well. And so it's really crucial is that for me as a leadership educator and as a scholar, I believe change has to happen in the spaces we care about. And so this is kind of my contribution to a usable tool in the field. So the significance of the research is jobs, employers and the community really care about the fact that we are graduating leadership learners and folks that identify as leaders, that they contribute in the spaces beyond this, beyond higher education. But what I contend is that while leadership learning programs advance higher education priorities, we must examine that from a critical perspective. That if we don't examine it from a critical perspective, we're not disrupting these unbalanced social systems. The other significance of this is that it opens up conversations to leadership educators to examine how both we individually and collectively disrupt or perpetuate white supremacy through our classroom environment. It also can, this study will be able to reconfigure leadership theory and content in ways that the field is starting to do more of, but certainly needs more contributions. And then I do believe that this study benefits leadership educators the most, but it also has higher education administrative applications, as well as faculty in higher education. So there is going to be findings that hopefully will be applied to faculty and higher ed administrators in general. So for my future research, I plan to validate the reflection tool to be used in curricular and co-curricular settings, and to also contribute critical race theory applications in post-secondary leadership learning scholarship. There is a low amount of research that exists on that. And I also would like to apply culturally responsive leadership learning integration into leadership curriculum. So we talked a little bit about the culturally responsive education that exists from K through 12, and that is a new research that's really being applied in leadership education and higher education. And then finally, there's so many discourse analysis projects I would love to engage in, including a review of syllabi, curriculum reviews. We have a lot in higher education facilitation guides that are passed around, books that we often use. And so I think that there are plenty of discourse analysis projects that could happen to understand those embedded meanings that we may not even understand that shows up in leadership education. My future research. So questions and discussions. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. A couple of questions first, just specifically for Erica.
Are all of the educators white?
No, there's a range of racial and ethnic backgrounds that will be present. And these are a good question. And that was intentional, that was important. So whiteness, with my definition of whiteness can be perpetuated both by folks of color, but also by white folks. So it's their whiteness norms is, so for my colleagues of color, they might engage in whiteness norms just to survive or to advance further along because that's how the system is set up, right? And so for me, I wanted to ensure that there was a range of racial and ethnic backgrounds for the leadership educators I'm observing. And so as I was doing some research, that was one of the questions I asked to the faculty, is would there be a diverse range of leadership educators to observe? That's a great question.
I thought your visuals were really beautiful too, and a thoughtful presence and intentionality as you were going through, somewhat engaging still in like a historically white presence of like how to present on work and how to use language. But I thought that you seemed to really own your ideas and intentionality around what you were looking to do and where it was coming from, connecting that through all the way through your presentation. I appreciate it. Worked hard on these visuals. Yeah. And in general, one of the things that I thought might be nice to see out of this I've had 4 of these 2 weeks is that they're different styles, right? And so sometimes you'll see different styles being more suited to some audiences than others. Also, people are in different stages. So only one person last week had already defended the whole thing. So sometimes you don't feel like it's fully synthesized until you're completely done with the stamp in terms of thinking through all of the implications and the next things. But I'm hoping that this has been useful to see. Now that we've had both presentations, do you all have questions for either individual presenters or about the process in general, especially with me and Cameron in the room, or kind of for either of them? Anything to discuss? We have just became another 5 minutes, so that would stick around a little bit longer after that. How does it feel having seen people present on their dissertation work, which there's a good mix of like first through third year students in the room? Does it feel like attainable? Does it feel stressful, intimidating?
I like how it's unique per person, so it's definitely like you show your personality fit.
I think the space has been incredibly helpful, especially 2 out of the 4 had the opportunity to see their prospectus defense, and so how they evolved their thoughts and kind of honed in on their research focus, be able to present it in a tangible way for the job talk definitely makes me feel a little more at ease for the process, and so I think that this space is incredibly valuable, even though it's just like the second iteration.
Dr. Chris Felker, you're affiliated with the Department of Sociology as well as the College of Education. How does that work in the job talk process?
So there are different kinds of affiliations or joint hires that can happen in some cases, and we have some people who, for example, they usually on the front end. So I'm just an affiliate. I'm an affiliate of centers. I'm an affiliate of the department. We have some other faculty who are affiliates of like economics or other spaces. And so that tends to mean like we're a friend of, we might recruit people to come work with us or to take our classes and vice versa. But there's no stakes on the job talk, on the kind of moving into a position. It can be, sometimes there's an ask on the front end from the hiring department who's interested in you of, are there bridges you would be interested in? Would you like to consider potential collaboration or affiliation with another department or another program? And so sometimes there's an opening like that, and you might feel out at that interview stage of like, are they looking for me to do this? So I can kind of bring or bridge certain things, maybe explore a little bit what that looks like. I would say affiliating is better than being a joint hire because you're not responsible for satisfying 2 different audiences, which may have different sets of expectations. So it's nice to have another relationship and like other potential people who can be supportive of me. You can't be an affiliate without being voted on. So at some point, for me, it was after we were going through the process, they got my CV, and I don't even know if some of them went to my talk, but they kind of reviewed my materials and then voted on me, and then I became an affiliate, and then we changed my just here locally job title, so it wasn't overly long. But sometimes people might be a joint hire intentionally or kind of a bridge candidate, for example, like you are partway in LSI and you're 50% there, or in leadership and you're 50% here. And so that you might want to ask questions around like, who's tenuring me? Like, who am I satisfying? Because you might be 50% paid for by somebody else, but the people who are tenuring you and promoting you, if you're on the tenure track, which not everyone wants a tenure track job, or can easily, at least at the beginning, get a tenure track job, but there are nuances. So yeah, it's not necessarily that you are jointly hired or officially hired, but it's some form of appointment that you can also ask for if you're interested in just like having an additional intellectual space to be in that satisfies the whole part of you, since we're all different and interdisciplinary in different ways. That was too long an answer. One thing I want to share too in terms of reflections was keep in mind as you're doing your presentations too, we'll have student presentation times in the spring series, as well as we're getting ready for all of the conferences to happen in terms of like, is this a room where people might want, like in a student affairs or higher ed program that has a lot of student affairs spaces, or November 18th through 20th, we're anticipate having faculty job candidates come visit us, and I would encourage you, if you're interested about the process, to attend those talks and see how people present about their work. They are both going to be somewhat practitioners, if not more heavily kind of a scholar practitioner kind of audience. And so if you're speaking to that space, it would be really beneficial to talk about in the talk your journey, your professional journey, how you're thinking about these different roles and how you've been in those spaces. That can be really important. And sometimes it makes sense to do that in your talk. Sometimes that's something that happens at dinner or in one-on-ones or in phone conversations leading up to scheduling without necessarily being in your talk. But I'm happy to talk with folks afterwards too.
Do you have any other?
Yeah, just to that point, oftentimes with the job talk, that's the one where they invite others.
Yeah.
So sometimes you think, like, I remember I went into one, I just thought I was going to be with the faculty, but there were students there, there was the dean of students, like practitioner. So like, you know, that's the space where campus community sometimes is invited to then see the candidate. And then you have to talk across, you know, different functional areas or different people that's in the space and in the room.
Right. And sometimes they're very interested in, sometimes there isn't space, or depending on, you can feel out as you're leading up to your job talk of what might folks really want to see, or who do you think will be present? Is this happening during a research brown bag? Is this kind of, you know, feeling out that space, which isn't necessarily going to be standard across your job search. But if you know that folks are going to be there from different spaces, it might be useful to share some highlights about your biography, certainly in the talk as well as in other spaces where you're there. Like, I was asked directly about whether or not I would be a candidate for the basketball team, or the faculty job basketball team, in a meeting with the faculty, not in a job talk space, but people want to know that they can like you. And so like last week we talked a little bit about like feeling relaxed and being able to show that you would be a good colleague and someone they'd like to be around, that they would trust alone in a room with students to be able to engage them in questions and not make them feel insecure or intimidated or lost. But I think even if it's not stated directly in a presentation, people want to know who you are, and so there'll be opportunities for you to do that. But it's people do want to know a touch of your life story and then get into each one the story about your work.
How did the two of you feel?
It was hard, like, to go, like, to get it in 20 minutes. Adding, like, even just adding, this is similar to when you defend the perspectives, share, like, but I added 2 slides to that. So, you know, like, a little bit about myself, and then at the end, additional feature research that I plan to do. And maybe I should work on being concise, but that was
You're going to have data.
yeah, exactly. Like, this is me without data. So that was hard, but I know typically it's 45 minutes, which will hopefully help when that time comes.
Yeah, for me, I feel I have a lot of things to say, but because of the time limitation, I have to skip a lot of things because I'm doing 3 papers, so there are a lot of things. So it really depends on different people's.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this synthesizing exercise and presenting was useful for you both, and as well as for the broader group. And so thank you. I may send out a quick Qualtrics at the end of this semester to feel out how we liked this and what things we might change for the future, if any. But I appreciate the community building, and thank you. Have a wonderful Wednesday.